Hey everyone, and welcome to the August edition of 3030. I am Pat Reinhardt from Conductor, and as always, thank you so much for spending 30 minutes of your valuable time with me, especially in August when I know so many people are on vacation. And welcome to my office at home, because right now, Conductor is in what we call YOLO month, which means we can work from anywhere. Something that our CEO Seth came up with many years ago, so we don't have to go to the office in the entire month of August and can work anywhere in the world. For me, I sit by my pool and hang out at my house with my kids. So that's my vacation. So anyway, let's talk about what we're going to talk about today. We're going to go through the August industry review, what I am seeing and hearing. As always, we are audience requested here. And today we will be going through education technology, which was the top requested, then home building, and then rounding it out with senior living, which has actually been requested quite a few times over the last few months. Then we're going to talk about Claude adding watermarks to content and how it's already broken and doesn't really, won't really impact anything. Let's put it that way. And yes, we are going to talk about Cloudflare, that is who is adding some form of AI visibility. Not a replacement for a platform. I'm going to go through why. It's just more data, very shallow level data, but that's still it's data that you can use. And then we're also going to talk about what's going on in France with a collection of over 300 French, publishers and newspapers that have filed a lawsuit, for lack of better words, against Google, challenging a 2022 deal that they are in breach of, apparently. But let's jump into it because we only have 30 minutes. Number one, August industry review. What are we seeing in Conductor's data? So at the moment, you can see here that again, AI referral traffic still is hovering around that 1% mark. And, August, through, July and into August, ultimately, nothing, some areas grew, like materials grew, but for the most part, everything largely stayed the same, of course, except that huge consumer staples, a bump over in AI referral traffic. But anyway, the main takeaways from here are that consumer staples still dominates, almost 4% of AI referral traffic. It's more than 3x the next person, or 3x, excuse me, the 1.23%, average, across the board, but nearly double the next highest industry. So again, what is really, what are people coming back from sites for? Usually it's like consumers, usually in that consumer staples area. The next one is infotech and materials are the only other ones that are above average. 2% around and about 2% respectively. Materials is a little bit lower, but again, those are the ones that were above, I'll say, or are above the average from a referral traffic standpoint. But also 6 of the 10, overall industries also sit below the average. Really, traffic that comes from, LLMs is really, really concentrated in a handful of industries, which again is most of it when you look across is consumer staples, infotech and materials. That's where a lot of it is. And as you can see in that chart on the left-hand side, on the upper left-hand side, rather, that dotted line is the average. And as you can see, most kind of fall below that. Next point here is that, utilities and communication services, they're laggards. They're really down there, like not even 0.5%, but definitely a third of the average. So again, you can see that still extremely volatile, but also, you're starting to see patterns really form as this data kind of trends on of what is actually where traffic from AI is actually coming from. And again, even though consumer staples has led growth all year, as you can see that huge, that huge wave there, it led growth all year, but definitely cooled starting in July, but continued in August. It peaked at over 5% back in May and June, but it's down to around 3% in August. So we saw, definitely Google or the AI LLMs, excuse me. Gotta get into that habit, right? I'm so used to just saying Google, although Google's a part of it. Turn the dial up and turn the dial down, but again, still pretty volatile. Again, materials is showing the strongest upward trajectory. Real estate's the only industry that's really losing ground, which actually, if you remember last week, And even this week in the home builders, we'll actually show that, that visibility there, but also just referral traffic in general is going down. And then last, rounding it out, like communication services, healthcare, utilities, they're slow and steady, right? They're coming up. Like people are probably getting more and more use to people, to people, like people are getting more and more used to LMs answering questions in those areas. Let's talk about visibility though. So as you can see here, this is the same chart sliced two ways, because the first chart on the left, that is everything in August across our entire database, but that the other shows how diverse AI visibility still is, right? Like everything in that gray is branded sites, it's publications, it's all the different types of sites there, right? But ultimately, when you take that out and you just look at this, you look at the slice of it, you can see that YouTube is still the single most cited site across all of these LLMs. Again, this is just across everything that we have, across everything that we're tracking, our entire database. There's hundreds of millions of prompts and topics, right? So when you think about that, like you can see here that community sites and those like kind of social user generated content type sites still dominate everybody. YouTube at at the height, more than double its next closest competitor, which is Reddit. And again, like there's a lot of talk around Reddit right now. Reddit is like questioning Google and the value of like AI overviews, or what the win-win between their partnership is. And again, then Google saying that Reddit doesn't get preferential treatment in in their traditional search rankings or in their LLM models. Hey man, whatever. Like it is what it is. But our data just shows you that yes, Google.com is in there, but Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube, Reddit, all of those are at the top. And then it's an interesting, it's an interesting slice of a few different, what I would call like big aggregator or content hub sites like Science Direct, NerdWallet, Forbes, big publications. EY.com does show up quite a bit, which is really interesting. And I see the comment there, so Ernst & Young, shows up quite a bit across our data, which is cited. But again, ultimately, and in fact, rounding it out with Amazon.com and Investopedia. But it's really interesting when you look across all of that. But again, looking at like what the biggest slice is, it's still the other, which is over 80% of everything that's being cited, which is all of those different sites that are out there, like branded sites, et cetera, right? Again, YouTube's the biggest outlier. Social community platforms, like those are the name domains. But ultimately, like for the most part, you can still see how diverse visibility is across our data set and across all these different LLMs. It's still really volatile out there, but YouTube and social sites is the real story, because that's the one thing that's really holding steady as sites kind of come and go every month. Like like EY wasn't there last month, but it was this month. Why? It's just the way that the citations fell, like this, back over the last 30 days. So ultimately, just something to take into account of where we're at today. So let's move on into some specifics. So as everybody knows who has joined, I do, typically 2 to 3 different industries specifically every 30-30. So if you want yours, please just throw it in the chat right now. And that will be how I will pick them for next month. I always appreciate all the audience participation. Thank you so much. But anytime, throughout the show, if you just want to throw that into the chat of what industry you'd like me to review next, I may do it next month. But moving on here. So the most requested by far last month was education tech. So ed tech, right? So I started with Coursera. Coursera is basically flat, but definitely had a little bit of a, roller coaster here from a page one standpoint, just speaking about, using Google's page one visibility as a proxy, right? A little bit of a roller coaster, but eventually just kind of winding up in the same place they were a year ago, which is literally in the exact same spot. So they're not up, they're not down, they're literally just right where they were, last year. Duolingo, riding a bit of a roller coaster here. Again, that was kind of the story in this space, is that there was a lot of up and down here. There was a lot of waves. There was a lot of surfing going on here. But Duolingo riding a good wave here, but definitely got hit by the May update. As you can see here, so did Coursera, and you'll see a couple of like Google algorithm updates playing in here. But ultimately, Duolingo got hit by the May update, but swiftly came back through July and August, and where they wound up today is up 15% in page one visibility. So their visibility is actually in pretty good shape. Udemy was the worst of everything I saw, unfortunately. Not having a great year, 37% decline in page one visibility year over year. Again, they were seeing the same dance. Like, you can see the waves, right? They were doing the same dance most of the year. But then once the May update hit, they just started to decline. It took a really huge divot out of their visibility, which was already down back from where they were a year ago. So unfortunately, a 37% decline for the folks over at Udemy. But that was kind of the story that I saw in education tech. A lot of waves, right? There was a lot of ups, a lot of downs. Most people wound up either flat or up a little. Again, Udemy was a little bit of an outlier being that far down. But again, it was a lot of movement. Like, it was not like anything steady up or down. It wasn't like everything was steady and then it went up, or everything was steady and then it went down. It was up and down the entire time. But one thing that did remain consistent, which you'll see across all the industries that we talked about today, is that their AEO visibility has increased. As we know, AI overviews continues to increase. I think the stats, like, it's showing over 50% of the time right now. I think I still have 56%. Actually have to check that in our data. I have to redo that that analysis. I'll do that next month. But I think it's around 56% of the time is what people are saying. Interesting. Also, a good point down here by Tara. Did Coursera and Udemy merge recently? I think they might have, but definitely maybe a factor. So that's a good thing to take care of. I didn't even think about that. But ultimately, in this space, like, AI visibility is up from an AI overview standpoint, using that as a proxy. But really, the story of this sector is that it was kind of rocky and kind of wavy, over the last year. Let's get into home builders. I actually look back over the last 6 months, and this has been requested almost every show, over 6 months. So sorry about that, but I finally got to it. So looking at, just like big home, like national home builders, just to make it fair across the board. DR Horton is one of the largest, or is the largest. They're on the upswing. Like, this is interesting, right? You can see this nice little bend that they were having. And then again, the March core update is actually where they started to have issues, right? And they wound up declining in top 10 visibility by 12% year over year. Now, when you look at something like the Reinhart Corporation, same thing, right? Like, literally the same thing. Like, they were starting it a little bit wavy, but you start to see this little bump up between December, January, towards the end of the year, and then March came and just a huge divot got taken out of them, right? So again, similar, not as the first half of the year wasn't as pronounced as DR Horton, but still Reinhart Corporation, kind of the same, the same vibe, where they made it to March, and then March was not kind to them. And then the Pulte Group, bucking the trend. Most home builders are down right now. Much like real estate, as you saw, real estate's kind of wavy right now, in general, but from the home builder sector, or industry in general, or specifically, definitely bucking the trend here with the Pulte Group, seeing about a 14% increase in page one visibility year over year. They were actually not impacted by literally anything, this year. They're when you really think about it, this is a few things. It's a small site, don't get me wrong, but again, still, it's really just kind of a straight line. Again, not as big of a site as the others, but one of the biggest home builders in the country is my understanding. But again, something that was consistent was the growth in AI overview visibility. So you can see this, and we're just going to continue to see this. I actually have to come up with a better visualization for the show, because everything's just going up and to the right. But I do think it's interesting to see that, really back in February, that March core update, Google really did hit the gas on AI overview visibility again, and they're starting to roll it out more worldwide now. They just rolled it out in France. We'll get to that in a minute, what happened there, but ultimately still seeing that up and to the right trend. And then last but not least, senior living centers. So senior living, Brookdale is one of the largest. I actually worked with a company for many years in senior living, so very familiar with this. But Brookdale down 7% year over year in top 10 visibility. Mainly driven again by the March core update. The March core update, had teeth, and like you're really starting to see it with these trends, right? Atria, similar pattern, down 2%. Again, mainly stemming from a decline from the March core update. And then Erickson's Senior Living, which holds a special place in my heart because this was the company that I worked with for many years, is seeing the same pattern. So really, literally every single senior living, site that I looked at, and really just across the board, they were kind of, everything was going good right up until March. And then there was a decline at March, whether that was by 10% or 4%. Whatever it was, but it was mostly in the red. Like senior living was mostly in the red, especially since March. So again, that's what I was seeing, across that industry. But again, from an AI overview standpoint, that growth continued, right? So, interesting stories across these three cohorts, right? You're seeing, you're seeing a lot of volatility, a lot of waviness. You're seeing basically some uptick and then a sharp decline around the March core update. But on top of that, you're seeing increases in AI visibility, which is interesting, right? Because, again, we all have to serve both masters here until Google gets rid of the 10 blue links, right? So ultimately, traditional search, you're still seeing a lot of folks having trouble, from a tradition, seeing a lot of volatility, on the traditional side, but they're seeing steady growth in AI visibility, just using AI overviews as a proxy. So interesting stuff there. Again, if you have an industry that you want me to look at next month, just throw it in the chat. I already see a bunch of them in there right now, but happy to look through it. Most popular wins. And as long as I haven't done it in the last couple of months, that's what will show up on the show next month, not next week. So let's get into the biggest news that everybody is talking about, which is Claude adding watermarks to its content. And now you might look at this and say, Pat, what do you mean? Number one, some of you may not know what a watermark is, and we will get into that. And then why are you saying that it's already broken? So let's just answer the first question, the most basic question. What the hell is a watermark? So a watermark is basically a hidden pattern, that is embedded, that you cannot see, like the human eye cannot see it, but basically a tool can see it, right? And it's usually some sort of patterns of ones and zeros or dashes, et cetera, right? It actually lives in the text itself, right? But if you copy and paste text, let's say you used Claude to write an article, and you copy and paste that article into your CMS, and then you put it live. The thing here is that it would survive that, and that watermark would travel with you, so that when search engines or other LLMs crawled it, they would notice that, oh, Claude processed this at some point, right? But basically, this is how people will tell if you use AI to write something, in its simplest form, right? That's really what it is in its simplest form. Now, the big question is why is Anthropic doing this? The big reason that they don't have a choice. This has to do with the EU's AI transparency code, which started on August 2nd, and this is a requirement. So they need to do this. What gets watermarked? New models get watermarked automatically. Older ones are catching up, but ultimately everything will be watermarked when you create something in Claude, right? Pretty much anywhere you use Claude, whether it's the app, API, code, cowork tag, all of it, it's all there. The watermark will exist, right? If you copy and paste it, the theory is that it travels with it and the watermark stays. Now, which I'll get to in the next slide, if you edit it, it's unclear if the watermark, actually stays. And there's actually, there's a guy who I'll get to in a minute, who did a whole presentation on why it doesn't travel with you. And if you just simply copy it into Notepad and then copy it somewhere else, or if you go in and you just start editing the text a little bit, that the watermark goes away because it isn't technically the same thing. But ultimately, Anthropic stayed kind of quiet on that. And again, this is not just about Anthropic. Google, Meta, OpenAI, Microsoft, they all signed the same deal. So this is going to happen everywhere, everyone. Now, you're probably saying why am I saying it's already, why is it not Why am I saying it's already broken, right? So here's why it's not a real fix. So there's a gentleman named Scott Aronson. He actually built this system at OpenAI, and this, and this link that you have that will be sent out to you is basically him doing a presentation on why this is broken and why it's not really, it's not really permanent, right? And that you can very easily get around it. And from there, so basically what it's doing, like at its core, right? It's watching your words, right? So for the most part, it's watching your words, but it's not watching like the idea of what you're trying to do, right? So it only holds up if the words don't change. So like your original word, like if most of the original words stay intact, right? So that's point number one. That if you edit it and you modify it, the watermark probably goes away, right? Now, if you translate it into another language and back, or you just paraphrase it, then the watermark is toast. The watermark's gone, right? Because again, if you're moving it around, if you're editing it, which you should be doing, you should never be taking something from AI and just copying and pasting onto your site. There should always be a human in the loop. We've talked about that a million times. But ultimately, the way he described it was the pineapple attack, which is like having AI stick pineapple in between every word and then delete them all, right? Scrambles the whole thing enough and the watermark can't survive it. So basically, if you put pineapple in the middle of everything, right? And then like into the thing, and then you delete it, you delete the word pineapple, basically the content will revert back to something that doesn't have the watermark because it's not really the original text, because you would put pineapple in everywhere and then you take it away and you changed the content. So once the content changes, the watermark goes away, right? It really only stays intact with the original text. The other thing, short, like factual answers cannot be watermarked at all. There's nothing to hide the signal in, right? Like, so if it's like a few, like, like a sentence, you can't really hide a watermark there. So that's another like kind of downfall of this. And the other thing is that no one's really even nailed down like what tampering with something like this like is like in the first place. So it's like if you take a piece of content from Claude and you're modifying it, et cetera, like, and then like like no one on the LLM side has been like, well, how do we know like if someone messed with it, if someone edited, right? And again, like Aronson's like what he says, and go watch the video, and I implore you to watch the video that's linked here. It only really works if you watermark the model's like style, right? Not just the words, because basically it's just watermarking your words, but not what the actual model's goal is, right? And that's still very much unsolved. And what this really is a band-aid, is what he's saying. He's like, this is some way that they can stay compliant, with this EU thing. But ultimately, the watermark is very easy to get rid of. So if you generate something in Claude and then you copy it into like a Google Doc and you edit it, and then you say, hey, this is what I want to put on my website, the watermark won't be there. Is basically what that means. And that's what that means. So don't freak out. Everyone's like, oh my God, there's going to be watermarks everywhere. Those watermarks will most likely never make it to whatever is published unless you're using a bot to do that and creating AI slop, which then the watermark will be there, right? All right, how are we doing on time? We're doing okay. So let's talk about Cloudflare adding some form of AI visibility, right? And why it is not a replacement for a platform. So right now, this was a big discussion over the last few days that Cloudflare is trying to give brands, visibility, into a way to see like if AI assistants are recommending them. Like that's how they're positioning, right? Because they sit in between. They sit in between like the AI platforms and the websites that they crawl, right? So like Cloudflare is in the middle, and so they're going to start providing some some data around this. But again, a lot of people are like, oh, do I need like visibility platforms? Do I need XYZ? And the answer is yes. Like this is just a dashboard that you'll get. At early access, it just launched on the 6th. There's no pricing or anything like that. But basically, there's somewhat of a generic score in how AI assistants talk about you. They track 5 metrics, which is citation rate, mention rate, prominence, share of voice, and industry fit, which is pretty cool. Nothing wrong with that. And it pairs those scores with like real crawl and referral traffic from their network. Right. So that's the unique thing that they're selling, is like the in-between piece of this, showing like which AI bots actually visit your site. which any of you can do right now by just looking at your log files. But again, like this is like one of those things where they're bundling it with their existing like agent readiness checklist. Everyone, this is basically like Search Console. It's going to be very shallow data. It's just going to be like I doubt they're going to show you any like individual topics yet, about what people are actually talking to you about. What they're showing you is just that you're being cited, you're being mentioned, and some sort of like prominence score against all the other data that they have, which is totally fine. But again, they're not going to tell you like what to do. They're not going to, they're not going to say, hey, listen, like you're actually being recommended. Here's the here's the strategy that you should follow. Here's a recommendation on what you should do. It's just a pretty much high level, data platform or data dashboard, which isn't too far off from like what Search Console or Bing Webmaster Tools is today. And hey, listen, it's more data. Like, it's something to look at. Now, if you use Cloudflare, take a look at it. I hope it's helpful for you. But again, it's not really a replacement for a platform. And this is not like a Conductor thing. Like, obviously, I work for a platform, but ultimately, it's more like don't think that way and don't let your bosses think that way. Oh, we can just use what Cloudflare gives us. It's going to be very shallow. It's not going to be as specific to your business as you think it is. It's going to be somewhat generic. But ultimately, that's fine. It's more data sources and more stuff to look at, which is totally fine. And the other piece of it is like to get into the details. It only looks at 2 AI engines, so it's only Claude and GPT. There's nothing for Gemini, nothing for Perplexity, Copilot, or Grok. It uses generic, unbranded prompts, and they pick them for you, right? Like you don't have any control over this. They're just going to pick prompts, like unbranded prompts in your category. So you can't edit it, you can't add your own. There's not a lot that you can, again, it's like Search Console. They're just going to give you stuff. The scores come from like a shared snapshot reused across every company in your category. Again, some high level visibility score, which is totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Your industry competitor set to like auto inferred. Again, it's lack of control, right? And the ironic thing is that it uses the same like prompt like sampling method Cloudflare's like press release call unreliable, right? So this is something where they kind of put their foot in their mouth, where like they say that one part of their stuff is like unreliable, but they're technically using the same methodology for this. So again, there's a lot of sand to be shaken out of the blanket here, everybody. But ultimately, again, if you have Cloudflare, take a look at it, see what it is. But again, you don't have a lot of control over it, and it's a very, very shallow view into that. Last couple of minutes here. Just wanted to cover this because I just found it interesting. I saw Glenn Gabe post about this. Again, the other two things are the main conversations over the last 30 days, but apparently AI overviews were unleashed in France, right? And almost immediately a federation, and everyone keeps calling them a federation, which I love, of nearly 300 French newspapers immediately filed a complaint/lawsuit against Google, because they're basically breaking the 2022 payment agreement that they made with them. Yes, Copilot would get Watermark too because Microsoft signed the same EU deal. But ultimately they say they rolled this out without their consent, which again, this was part of that deal that they signed back, and they were already fined like $250 million in 2024 for breaking this deal again. Like the core complaint that everyone has is that the summaries cut traffic to news sites. They don't click through. They're losing money in traffic. And this was the whole point of the deal in the first place. Again, like Google goes through its same thing. Hey, summaries help people explore more content. Blah blah blah. But again, like this is a part of the EU's what is it? It's a copyright infringement thing. Basically, it's whether Google unfairly uses their content or not, and they signed a deal. And so what happened was immediately when this happened and people started to lose traffic, they started to sue them. They started to sue Google. So again, I think that this is going to have repercussions across the entire industry and across the entire world. That if these types of deals, something in the US is eventually going to happen like this, where like all these publishers are finally going to get fed up, and they're all going to band together, and the government's going to get involved. But ultimately, the French said no, and they said no, you can't do this. It'll be really interesting to see where this lands, and I'm looking forward to following the story, honestly. But with that, everybody, today we talked a lot about algorithms and LLMs, but just remember the only algorithm that matters is the heart, mind, and soul of your customer. And if you create great content that they like and love, they will come back and be customers for life. If you are a Conductor customer, please come join us in the community. We have a lot of great conversations there. I do a monthly community chat, which is actually the Tuesday after the live, after every live 30/30. So next Tuesday, I'll be doing that. Please come join us. We have a good time. And with that, everybody, thank you so much for 30 minutes of your valuable time. As always, I say this every month. This is my favorite part of my job, and I wouldn't be able to do it without all of you. I'm heading out on PTO next Wednesday until September. So I wish you all a fabulous rest of the summer. I hope you are taking off some time as well, or just getting back from some time off. Thank you so much for everything all these years, and thank you for joining me once again. Have a great summer, y'all. I'll see you in September.